My dad taught me a very significant lesson when I was 7 years old. And what he said to me in a little paper route that I had, whatever you do, you give 100% to that and no less. Because to do less, you're stealing from the company you work for, you're stealing from the people, you're stealing from yourself. And I've applied that through my whole life, including when I was diagnosed with heart failure. I grew up in a small community. To give you some idea that there were 100 people in my graduating class. I wanted to be a veterinarian. My parents had friends that were associated with Syracuse, so I was able to get accepted. I did great my first 2 years. Then I discovered fraternities, and my grades kind of ebbed a little bit, and I realized I was wasting my dad's money, and I didn't want to do that, so I dropped out. I went in the military in 1963. It was a Friday night just after Thanksgiving. They came into our barracks, woke us up, issued us jungle gear, loaded us on a transport, and 2 o'clock the following afternoon, I was sailing under the Golden Gate Bridge, headed for Vietnam. Think about the scariest thing that's ever happened to you. Multiply that times 100, and then multiply that times 365. And you'll have some concept of the threat that you dealt with every day of your life for a whole year. You know about Frank that used to come to meetings with us? Yeah, I know Frank.
Okay, you know Frank.
And I remember when I came home, I was still a young man. I was 21. But I was a young man in age, feeling like an old man psychologically. I was much more disciplined, much more mature, and I was certainly committed to the point where fraternities didn't matter to me anymore. Nancy's my second wife. We were married and together 25 years. Nancy had 4 kids, 3 daughters and a son, and then I have 2 sons of my own. You've read this, and it's a fact that a lot of blended families, there's resentment from the husband for kids that already exist. The first thought that echoed in my mind was my dad telling me, if you make this commitment, you don't have the right not to give it everything you have. And so I've never treated these kids as anything other than my own, and I ended up adopting Stephanie as my daughter.
He chose to marry my mother and treat me as his daughter. And that was a choice that he made, and I value it every day. You any good?
Really good stuff.
Yeah, I thought.
She made me a better person and made it possible for me to have a better life. In fact, I could argue pretty clearly that if it wasn't for Nancy and Stephanie, I might not be here today. My wife and I walked every day in the park, and there's some pretty good hills in the park where we walk. Well, I was having a struggle getting up those hills and getting my breath. Well, you know, I'm a billy goat when it comes to that, so I love hills. I knew at the time that what Nancy had done previously, but I'd sort of forgotten about it. She sold heart medications to cardiologists for 10 years. When I described the symptoms to her, she said, we're going to an emergency outpatient clinic right now. They took my blood pressure, which was 190/90. My heart rate was 200 beats a minute, and my heart is swollen to 3 times its normal size. So they said, you have to go to the emergency room right now. Severe level 4 heart failure. There's only 5 levels, and you don't want the 5th one. So when I asked the doctor at Stanford, I said, okay, I want to know what the statistics are. And he said, well, 50% of the people die within the first year of diagnosis. So then my Vietnam thinking kicked in. I said, yeah, well, I ain't 50%, okay? Then he said, and another 50% die within the first 5 years of diagnosis. And so the next morning, Nancy and my daughter, Stephanie, came into the room. And I looked at Stephanie, and she was 11 years old at the time. She had a big smile on her face. And then I saw her eyes.
You know, when you're 11, when you're a little girl, you don't fully understand the ramifications of you have heart failure, here's what you need to do. If you don't, you die. I didn't understand that. And I was afraid and scared that he would go into surgery and I'd never see him again.
And in my mind, this is what I said to myself. I will do everything I have to do, no matter what it takes, to continue living, because I will not let that little girl go through life without a father. And I never saw myself in any other light from that point forward. I was going to get well. If you don't follow the procedures, the guidelines, if you don't take the medication that you have to take the rest of your life, and you have to take it religiously, if you have lifestyle issues, you need to change your lifestyle. If you don't exercise, if you don't monitor what you eat, you're going to die sooner than you should. It's that simple. There is no cure at the present time. So the best you can do is to do everything you need to do to give yourself the best opportunity to continue living.
I think a lot of it is dedication and changing your perspective. Okay, I have to change. I'm going to think of it positively. If I do these things, I get to live. If I don't do these things, I die. So it's a matter of perspective, and he had the right perspective. I want to live, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get there.
You could count on one hand the number of times I've ever forgotten to take my medications, and I've been doing this 15 years. And here I am, I'm well beyond the 5-year 50%. And in some ways, I guess I'm an anomaly, I don't know.
My father has a lot of determination. It's not just the military. I believe it also is because that's how he grew up. And that's how he continued to live when other people might not have.
In the meantime, I'm living a good life, and it's even better now. The last 4 years of my life have been the happiest of my life, and that's saying something since I lost the love of my life. But I still have other people that look to me for guidance, so I don't have the luxury to let them down or be selfish.